everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Black Fashion History. Of course, the podcast that celebrates the contributions of Black people all around the world to the fashion industry. And I am your host, Taniqua Martin. And today I am really excited because I'm going to be talking to Charlene Dunbar, who is the owner and creative director of the brand Suakoko Betty. And Charlene and I have worked together for quite some time now. Since 2018, I think I work on a lot of marketing things for her. And so I've gotten a chance to see a little behind the scenes of building the brand. And then, of course, this conversation is near and dear to my heart because Charlene is Liberian and I'm Liberian. And as we explore, African fashion and its contributions to the industry and its direction, I always want to make sure that our country is represented. So I'm really excited to get into more about Charlene's story, her heritage, and her brand, and all of those good things. Charlene, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Taniqua. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we're just going to jump right into the conversation. And so for those who may not have heard of you before, not familiar with the brand, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to start Suakoko Betty, and just like a little spoiler, Charlene is an engineer turned designer. So I want to give her a chance to share how that journey came about.
Yes. So, my story is kind of wild, but just to start at the end, Suakoko Betty is a clothing brand that really celebrates West African design. We're all about bringing the joy, all about celebrating authenticity within women. But really when, the story of the brand, I say started when I was like 7 or 8. I always loved all things fashion. I loved all things art. I'd be the one upstairs at my aunt's house in Liberia, in Painesville, looking through all her Cosmo magazines, looking for why I didn't lost in that very grown folks magazine. But I always loved fashion. And I'd sketch clothes. And I think growing up African, we love our custom outfits. We love to have outfits made. So from a very young age, I would like take my sketches to my mom and have them made. So like fast forward, of course, there was the war in Liberia and we came to the States. I came to the States as a 9th grader. It was funny because when we lived in Liberia, I didn't really appreciate African fashion. And I would kind of like turn up my nose at lapa suits, the traditional suits with the hair tie and the pretty blouse and the long skirt. I was like, that's for old people. But when I found myself in Atlanta, kind of tossed in here because of the war, no friends, minimal cultural connection, I really appreciated where I came from. I appreciated, my mom's lapa suits. I appreciated, the African prints because it's like, it was my connection to home. Mm-hmm. So, that was one thing I remember going through homecoming. And, there's always a day where they make people wear togas. And I was like, I can relate to a Greek toga, but I can relate to this lapa suit. So just even kind of being a fish out of the water in the States, really remembering holding on to my African culture tight, in that experience, dealing with people calling us African booty scratchers. How did you get here? Did you swim? All those things really kind of caused me to just really appreciate and value where I came from and want to let people know there's so much beauty in West Africa. There's so much beauty on the continent and not what you guys normally see on TV. So that was high school. Fast forward to college. I went the engineering route because being an immigrant, ain't nobody got time for a liberal arts degree. Right. You know this. I think you have a similar story. So I considered architecture and I think they made like 24K. And then I looked at engineering and I like science. I actually like math and the money was looking right. So I picked it based on the salary and I got into a product development career. And funnily, being a product developer is really close to being a designer. But even, as I started my corporate career, there was something missing. So I went back to fashion school, got a fashion design degree. And then a few years later, I really feel like God spoke to me to say, this is a time, go ahead and start that brand that really marries your love for West African culture and where you find yourself being in America now, right? So it's like, take, that culture and the prints and all the things you love about being Liberian and mix it with where you find yourself now, which is living in Atlanta. You get off work, you go hang out with friends, you do fun things on the weekends. I really wanted to take those traditional suits and make them more modern. And that's how Suakoko Betty was born. The long, short version.
So you were a very bold teenager to be wearing lapa suits in high school. I don't I don't know if I could do that. And I went to high school, well, I don't want to say much later, but like later than you obviously. So me by the time I went to high school, people were more open to other cultures.
That's so
So I can
interesting.
only
Yeah.
imagine what the landscape and environment was like when you were in high school. And I find it interesting that that drew you towards your culture instead of away from it, because a lot of people, when they migrate to the US and people start making fun of them or whatever, just because they're not exposed to other cultures, it makes them
Yeah.
shy away from that. So I love that your approach was to lean into it, and it kind of formed a little bit of like connective tissue, so to speak, to, connect you back to home, since you are thousands and thousands of miles away.
Yeah. So it's funny you say that because I mean, I definitely didn't get it right all the time. Like I was wearing my lapa suit, for homecoming, but just even my accent, I remember like tucking away my African accent. Like, listen, you better conform. You better get in line. So it's almost like I wanted to claim that part of me. I wanted to kind of push back and say being African is amazing. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, let me not talk so African because I don't want the booty scratcher jokes to come up again. So yeah, don't give me too much credit for being bold. I was still a chicken teenager in in a lot of respects.
But those are formative years, so you're figuring out yourself and then you're thrust in this new environment. So,
Yes.
everyone has their different approach to migrating. But you mentioned in the story of Suakoko Betty how you were just influenced by, the fashions of like your mom and your aunt and just the women around you growing up in Liberia. What about that like really drew you at such a young age?
A couple of things. So again, leaving Liberia very abruptly, when we left, we thought the war would blow over in like a few weeks, maybe a few months. So kind of, when we realized, hey, we're going to have to stay here a while, I feel like remembering what it was like to be living in Liberia was something that I held on to. I didn't want to wear the Auntie Lapa suits, but I remembered how much better life was back home. I remember, my mom struggling, working jobs to like make ends meet. And then I would think about kind of, I wouldn't say it's nostalgia, but it's like, man, I remember she would go to parties and be with our aunts and they're all decked out. They're in their suits, they're cooking these amazing dishes. So I think those memories, I really called on them in terms of just like, I missed that number one. And we had a beautiful life back home, right? So I kind of remember those things and I really treasure them in the sense of I miss home and I appreciate home a lot more now that I'm away from it. And the second inspiration point was, okay, so we moved to Atlanta and our church home, which was founded by my uncle, actually, it was mostly Liberians going there. So imagine I came to the States as a young teenager. So a lot of, I guess my knowledge of Liberia was kind of built upon by going to church. So it's like I go to church with these ladies and I see them wearing like, maybe a solid print blouse and like a wrap skirt and then like a different colored hair tie. So I think even my understanding of what African fashion looked like, some of it were memories drawn from when we lived there. But then a lot of it was built on just peeping what people were wearing to church and just seeing how they mix colors or how they mix textures. They kind of became my library of that's kind of dope. I wouldn't wear that full outfit, but maybe I would take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and make a cocktail dress. So those were kind of like the two sources that I drew from a lot.
Okay. So, fast forward through schooling and now you've like started this brand. What inspired you to name it Swakoko Betty? One, that's not an easy name, like at a
Mm-hmm.
glance,
Yes.
and it's not intuitive. So, what made you go in that direction?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. So like Suakoko Betty was not our first name. And I
Oh,
think you've heard this. It was actually even more quirky name called New Republic, right?
no, I did
So
not
it
know that.
yeah, it was New Republic and it wasn't NEW, it was actually NYU because I had to be funky and a lot of Liberian names start with NY. So I said, oh, I'll be cute and make a New Republic. And new in the sense of, hey, we're doing new things with African prints, we're taking it in a non-traditional direction. And child, people were like, are you associated with New York University? Are you part of the Republican Party? What's going on? And I was just like,
Really?
this is this is not going the way that I expected. So it was causing more confusion than it was helping. So I remember going back to the drawing board and praying about it. And God showed me a scripture about like new beginnings. And the other thing I thought about, so my dad's hometown in Liberia is actually Bone County. It's like north of Montserrat, the capital county. And his hometown is called Suakoko. And I always loved that name. I thought it was beautiful and it rolled off the tongue. And I was like, man, I've always wanted to do something with Suakoko. When I dug into the name, it's a Puela name. Coco means place. And then Sua means new era or beginning. So I say, yes, yes, yes. This is like God
Oh,
because
that's good.
I wanted it to still be about a new beginning, doing something fresh with our prints and like, how we approach design. So that's where I pulled Swakoko from. And then the Betty, well, first of all, I gotta be honest, there were a lot of bands doing like crazy things at the time, like the walking chicken and the fighting, the fighting peppers. So I said, I'm gonna put an unusual name with it. And I chose Betty because Betty is like the girl next door. It's usually associated with America, but I wanted to kind of merge the two realms, like the African side doing fresh things and then the whole girl next door aesthetic, the idea that you could wear my pieces every day. A lot of the African clothes I'd seen up to that point were more like special occasion, like it's a wedding or, it's a big, thing at church or it's something more formal. It's a whole 3-piece outfit. So I wanted to take it more into everyday style direction. So put that Betty on that Swakoko and that's how I was born.
It's funny that you said the Betty represents the American aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think of the name Betty, I think Liberia just because I know so many like people named
Wow.
Betty.
That's crazy.
So I was like, oh, she went with Betty because there's so many like women named Liberian women named Betty. Like
That's true. I didn't even think of that. I think we have more precious. Do we have more precious? We
I
didn't
have
even
a
think
lot of
about
precious.
Nigeria. We have a lot of
Yeah,
precious. Yeah.
that's
Swakoko precious.
so you talk a lot about, merging your heritage with kind of where you are now or this new place that you found yourself to be in. So
Mm-hmm.
as the brand grows and as you think of how you want to represent yourself, how you want to represent the brand to the world, do you ever face a challenge between making sure there is a good amount of like appealing to the heritage or infusing your heritage versus being contemporary enough or appealing enough to like a global or Western audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's definitely evolved. I mean, when I think about back when I started the brand, it was really about celebrating the culture, about like pushing back on narratives that, West Africa doesn't have anything to offer. It's like all these images we see on TV. So it was really like, this is a celebration of culture. This is a celebration of our design and we're here to shout it from the rooftop. So I'd say since the point of when we started, there has been, I think, a deeper appreciation. People have had more experiences with traveling back home. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's evolved. I think about that girl back in the high school hallways and just really getting that boldness and that, being like, hey, I'm comfortable in my own skin. I'm comfortable being African. I think that message of being comfortable, being bold, it kind of even transcends African culture. I can think about a lot of women who, struggle with just really showing up authentically at work or showing up in different spaces where it's like, hey, you have to be this way as a woman. So I think definitely the African heritage part is still there, but I think it's grown from there in terms of even if you're not West African, you can still appreciate what these prints express, whether it's the joy or I'm going to show up authentically, I'm going to buck the curve. So I think I've evolved it since then. And even the women that I talk to, they're like, I just feel good in the prints. And, they might mention the African connection. They might not, but a consistent thing has been, I feel joy when I wear these clothes. I feel more confident when I wear these clothes. I feel authentic when I wear them. And I think every brand kind of has to go on that journey. I think certain times you start your brand is for very personal reasons. I started Swakoko in a very personal way. I was like, I want these clothes. I think they should exist and I'm going to make them. And then the more I learned as a business person and then got to know my customers, I was able to grow it from there.
I think that's interesting because there was a period in fashion where people were like wearing things from African designers or African inspired clothing or whatever for a very like specific purpose, whether it's like, oh, it's Black History Month and I want to celebrate my
Mm-hmm.
heritage during this time, or I'm wearing this to go to this thing, not necessarily being picked up as part of their everyday wear. And I think
Mm-hmm.
now there's more of a transition where people are incorporating like these types of prints and designs and
Mm-hmm.
textiles and techniques into everyday wear, and it's looked at not as like, not necessarily for the Africanness of it, but
Mm-hmm.
just as a piece of clothing in their wardrobe. I
Mm-hmm.
think like when I ask people nowadays like who their favorite designers are, they start to think of African designers or other people just because they love
Mm-hmm.
the stuff. And so I think for me, I think that's a beautiful transition, but I would love to know your thoughts on that. Like, are you excited when you hear your customers say like, oh, I'm drawn to this because it makes me, obviously you excited when they say it makes you feel good, but when they're drawn to it for reasons outside of like the cultural piece.
I love that. And I love it in the sense of, I think it makes space for other people. I think you would really limit yourself as a business where it's, if we were to focus on, hey, it's only for people who want to celebrate the African culture. So I think that's really limiting kind of what we have to offer as a brand or even what the culture has to offer. And I know there's debates about, should white people wear African prints? And I'm like, of course they should. To me, when you wear someone's print and you acknowledge where it came from, that's a way of celebrating something. That's a way of kind of like showing appreciation to something. And I think it's all about how you do it. But I think if you're wearing it, I think it just starts a conversation about this originated from Africa. To me, it just kind of celebrates it versus before it was kind of this niche thing that people whip out in February
Right.
and then kind of put it back away. So I think it shows that it's being embraced, it's being celebrated. Another trend that I think has really helped too is just people traveling to the continent and
Mm-hmm.
having these experiences and being able to say, oh yeah, I went to Ghana, I went to Kenya, I went to South Africa. I think, once they have those experiences, it's like, this is who I am. This is not like a special occasion or kind of one-off thing that I'm doing. So that's made a big difference.
When I first became like familiar with your brand was in like 2009. I was graduating from high school.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the work that you did at the time was like with wax print or Ankara. And then now you do a lot of like batik tie dye fabrics, and you lean
Mm-hmm.
more into that direction. So I have kind of a twofold question for you. Was this an intentional shift? And then if so, why?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. So, there's a few reasons. So one thing about the wax prints that, they're gorgeous and definitely when I see them, I think of home. But they're not, most of them are not made in Africa, right? So
Right.
you see them, you associate them with Africa. You're like, it's an African print. But when you think about the supply chain and who gets paid for that print, I'd argue like 80, 90% of it is made in China, right? So if, my ethos for the brand has always been celebrate African culture. And to me, the natural extension of that is if we're going to celebrate it, it's going to blow up. People are going to wear it for Black Panther premieres. African economy should benefit from it. So I think that's one thing that was important to me with the tie dye. Like, tie dye, you can get some photocopy tie dye from China, but the real deal stuff is going to come from the continent. It's coming from Nigeria. It's coming from Senegal. It's coming from Nigeria. Liberia. My first tie dye prints came from this amazing woman named Fatu, and I worked with her on like colors and different designs and whatnot. So that's one thing. The tie dye, I can trace the line more clearly in terms of I know the maker. This person is going to benefit when I buy this fabric. They're going to hire more people. They're going to be able to elevate their family. That's one thing. I think the second thing is the boutiques. I feel like wax prints did begin to saturate the market a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that with as Suakoko Betty, we're able to get more, let's say differentiation, but just a little bit more specialness with the boutique prints. I think, they're beautiful. Some of them are a little bit more artistic. Like I mentioned, I can work with the maker on the color story and the actual design. So I liked being able to offer my customers something a little bit more unique, something a little bit more hand curated versus, hey, I went to the Ankara market. This is what I found. And there's nothing wrong with that. I sell a lot of great clothing from that path. But I feel like it's so interesting at pop-ups. You've probably observed it too. People will touch the batik and be like, oh, like it feels different. It looks different. So I think we're able to offer a much more premium experience to our clientele when we started bringing in more of the boutique. And I think the numbers kind of spoke for it too. People, it commanded a higher price. There was higher demand for it. So that was exciting that when we introduced it, I remember when we dropped it, we had done like a new photo shoot and it was like world stopping. I mean, people are like, when is this thing going to be available on the website? And they hadn't done that for the wax prints before. So it's been really exciting to kind of bring that and make it a main part of what we offer.
No, and I think it adds to the conversation just about Africa in fashion in Africa as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
When you have different brands that are like using different techniques and picking up different things, like I said. So like I feel like a lot of people right now are doing wax print, or for a time
Mm-hmm.
period, like everybody that was labeled an African brand is doing wax print. So, not only differentiating yourself, but showing the world like Africa's other things.
Yeah.
There's wax print that, people most closely relate to the continent. Then, of course, there's that argument of whether or not wax print is actually African. But then there are these other things that people have been doing in years, whether that's like the indigo dyeing or batik or
Mm-hmm.
like, the country cloth weaving, whatever it is. Like there are all these other beautiful fabrics and techniques that also represent the continent. And it's like, hey, everybody get into this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And like he said, as those things blow up, the continent blows up and people theoretically are also supported and those communities are supported. So I do love that you said that, because I think when it comes to fashion specifically, like Black things in general, it's like it becomes a wave, people jump on it, and
Mm-hmm.
like it's being mass produced, but the actual communities aren't benefiting.
Yeah.
So thank you for touching on that as something that was important for you and your brand. Would you say that this is a standard, in your opinion, this should be a standard across brands? Like if they're going to be working with like different cultural pieces, that, these communities as well should be a bit of the beneficiary?
I think so. I think that the short answer is yes. I think I have been frustrated as a designer where I see a lot of non-African or even non-Black designers jumping on the whole African aesthetic. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you go on the website, it's like, I know what that is, but there's no kind of acknowledgement of, hey, these are tie-dye techniques that are originated, in Mali or originated in Nigeria or, even Indonesia. Because I mean, obviously West Africa doesn't have like a patent on tie-dye. It's done in Japan and other places around the world. But I do sometimes have inner anger, to be very honest. I know there was actually an instance of where I pitched an influencer who is not Black about some of my pieces, and she passed on it graciously. And then I was looking on her page after that. And then I saw her wearing a piece that looked distinctly African, but was made by another designer who didn't look like me. And I just thought it was ironic that she was able to accept the aesthetic kind of when it was, I felt like when it was co-signed by the other person, like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, they're doing it is cool versus the person who's actually from the place who makes it. So I
Right.
think there's a two-sidedness to it. You're glad that African designs are being showcased and being amplified, but then there's annoyance about who's getting credit for it. It's like, oh, Ula Johnson invented this tie-dye technique. And it's like, no, Sis Fatu was doing that like 15 years ago. So I think that's the frustration. I wish more people would acknowledge and credit, hey, these designs, I drew inspiration from X place. And I think, I want to say it was Dior. They did like a navy blue and cream collection and they worked with a local wax producer, Uniwax. To me,
Mm-hmm.
they did it right. They're like, okay, we're going to pull it from, this West African aesthetic, but we're actually going to produce it in the region and kind of give credit to the people who are known for it. So I think there's a right way to do it. There's a wrong way to do it. And the wrong way is when you kind of just pull it namelessly. And it's just like, it's this thing I'm going to put on and throw off the next day without crediting who the originators are.
For sure. And then it gets into the question of like, well, is like African culture really being amplified if people aren't being credited, or is
Mm-hmm.
this just another like fashion's version of colonization in a sense?
Yeah.
So I do want to switch gears just a tiny bit. So when I think about like African or African inspired fashion, I always like to say that I consider it like haute couture because when I think about the actual definition of the word being like made to order, one of one, handcrafted, like
Mm-hmm.
those are the things that I associate with like African fashion and then like the African fashion cycle. I know growing up with my parents, you know, everything was custom. We get our cloth and then we go to the tailor and then we pick a style or we like communicate verbally what our style is. They make something for us. They never follow the style that you show them. They always got to add that little special one
Sure.
too. Like it's never just straight what you tell them, but it's a very like luxurious process in my opinion. So I
Mm-hmm.
would love to know your perspective on that. Do you agree with me? Would you consider like African fashion in the process and not just maybe like making clothing, but even when you think about, the techniques and like how things are crafted, would you put that on par with what the world considers luxury when it comes to fashion?
Yeah, I would consider it definitely luxury in the sense of being able to express yourself. I mean, I can relate to that thing about the fact that everybody can sew their own clothes kind of democratizes design. It's like literally you want a one shoulder thing. It's like you can have it made. I don't see it as haute couture because I think haute couture is like this insulated process. I think about people bent over in a room making this thing that they're going to show to the audience. And it's like, oh, wow. And I feel like what we do is much more intimate and personal. Like, Taniqua, you gay a lapa. I mean, like we do the weddings and like 50 people have the same lapa and you will have 50 different looks. And I think that is so cool that everyone's outfit is an expression of their own style and experiences. So I'd say it's luxurious in that you kind of pick your own details, but I feel like it's way more personal than haute couture. And the quality, well, like you said, it depends on the tailor that you pick. It can be all the way great, but I think the best part is this idea of everyone's a designer and everyone can kind of like express their creativity when they go to that tailor. They pick their style, they pick their lapa, and it's like nobody else is going to have my look. And I think that's something I don't think of other cultures who are so big on custom outfits like West Africans. I don't think I've seen it so much in Asian culture. I'm trying to think of another group that does that in a big way.
Well, I don't know how like custom things get, but I know when I think about like Indian weddings
This is
and
true. Yeah.
all the things that they pull together for like their different cultural events, that
Mm-hmm.
it's an intricate process.
Mm-hmm.
I would say maybe like Indian culture or Southeast
This is true.
Asian.
This is true. But we are undefeated when it comes
For
to a
sure.
custom look. It's like this is what we do. Okay.
For sure, we're absolutely undefeated, and it's the norm, which I think in other places is not the norm. I'm like thinking back to my wedding, and a lot of my friends are American, and the whole idea of having to get something made was
Mm-hmm.
different for them, and
Mm.
it's just because it was something I was used to. I'm like, oh, you go get your measurements, you go do this, and you go do that, and it's as simple as that. And everybody was like scrambling, like I don't know what to do, and I never had this done before, and this is such a they found it like to be a very not only interesting but
Mm-hmm.
exciting process to get something that felt like one of one, which is an experience that they didn't have, and it's not something that I had put together before that. The the thought process that other cultures may not have that experience.
Yeah, we'll whip up an outfit for anything. I was laughing because my cousin's daughter graduated the other day, and the family of five, they were in their matching fits. And the joke was, they were like, well, we pulled this together 2 days ago. So, I know it kind of started for weddings, but now it's like, for different events, celebrations, is like, we're gonna get the matching custom fits together. And I think, that's something really unique and fun that we do.
So, what are your thoughts on the current style scene in like African fashion? And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean like trends or anything, but I mean like, I guess, the global perspective and how it's moving. What are your thoughts on like how that is trending?
Yeah, I think a lot of exciting things are happening with African fashion. I think number one, I'm seeing just a lot of great houses rise up on the continent. I know one of my favorites is like Makio. And then the other one is out of Senegal. I want to say it's like Shelby Kane. I can
I'm
see
not
it. She has a
familiar.
beautiful studio, but I'm just loving how many different fashion houses are coming up out of West Africa. They're doing the different fashion weeks, and kind of back to what we talked about before, a lot of their sourcing is from the continent. So it's like, we're going to need some more tie dye. We're going to need some more factories. So I love that in terms of how that market is growing and they're really exporting African design. I think when I look at it more globally, I look at a lot of the designers that I started out with. And I think there's been an expansion. I mean, you talked about me shifting from like just the wax prints to the batiks. And I feel like the whole market is expanding. I feel like a lot of designers don't feel limited to, I don't even have to do a print, but I
Mm.
have a customer. It's typically a black woman and I'm going to create these things, whether it's like stretch dresses or, solids in like a wide leg pant style that she can't find anywhere else. So I think it's really exciting. I know that the wax prints were kind of like our entree, and that the more we get to know our customers, we're kind of expanding from there. So I think it's a good thing in terms of not feeling like, well, to serve this market or to be an African designer, I have to have the wax print, have the tie dye. So I think it's beautiful when I see people kind of going beyond that and kind of pushing themselves to say we can be more than one thing. I think that's awesome.
You brought up something that I find interesting, so I'm going to ask you, what do you think defines like African fashion? Well, I think I'm asking that wrong. Like, what would you say someone needs to have to be defined as an African fashion designer? I'll equate it to music. Like, you see a lot of Afrobeat artists nowadays. Like Wizkid, for example, was the big one who says like he didn't want to be identified as like an African artist or Afrobeat
Mm-hmm.
artist. Like he does other things. So equating that to design, like, well, how then do we define an African designer? Is it just a designer that happens to be African, or is it a designer who happens to be African but also incorporates African elements and, heritage into their brand?
It's a great question. I mean, I am leaning to answer number one. I think I'm questioning if we need a category of African
That's
fashion.
good.
We don't necessarily say, oh, that's European fashion or that's Asian fashion. It's just a designer, right? So I think definitely I love the season we went through of African fashion. Again, that amplification. People are paying attention. There's more appreciation of what comes out of the continent. But I see us going to a place where it's like, that's just some good design. I don't necessarily see the African connection. There's not a palm leaf. That's not a design, but it's beautiful design. And I think the more I see that, the more excited I get in terms of us not necessarily needing the African elements. It's like we can be on these stages. We can just be bread and butter, great designers. And it's not, oh, I need to check these boxes of having the print. So I think that was awesome, but I'm happy to see that people can broaden beyond that and say I can compete with anybody else. So long answer to a short question. I'd love for us to get to the point of, yes, the person happens to be of African heritage and they're doing a great thing with plaids or they're doing something crazy with knits. I think Hanifa is a great example of that, where
Yeah,
her
for
stuff is
sure.
universally loved and appreciated. If anything, I think she does excellent with like dressing curvy women, but I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that's African inspired. And that's okay. She's an amazing designer, period. So I think we're outgrowing that word, if I should say so. I think we're kind of outgrowing it, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you on some parts of that. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel the same way when it comes to getting to the point where designers are not outgrowing, but aren't put into a category like, oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
African fashion or this is African designer.
Yeah.
They're a designer that plays on the same like world scale as everybody else. But I also think it's important to like maintain. brands that are African inspired,
Hmm.
because I think it's important to like have those elements still in fashion. So when I
Hmm.
think about, well, I can't think of any brands right now, but I was trying to think of something that was like,
I see 8190, the tie-dye folks out of Ghana.
yes,
Consistent. Yeah.
yes. Okay. Yes, for sure.
Hmm.
Exactly. I think it's important for there to be something that people can point to and say these things are based in like African history, African cultural practices, and give credit to that when,
Hmm.
other designers or other brands are like inspired by that. And I think it's important for the world to know like where this comes out of. So I think we need brands that do that to keep those conversations going, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like what you said. I think yes, and the challenge is not, so I think it's how we define the word. Because sometimes I think we say African fashion, people check out and say that is for Black people who want to celebrate their culture. And I think that really limits us and limits our market potential. So I think if the word was flipped to be that and other things, I'd be happy. But I think sometimes there's a sense of African fashion, oh, they're going to show up with a kente dress or like,
Yeah.
a wax print pant or something. And it's like, oh, that's for that group. And I don't think that's true, but I think we need to grow out of a place of African fashion is just this. It's respect for the heritage and the craft techniques, and it's other things. It's a great spandex dress as well.
Yeah,
So,
that is
yeah,
true.
there's room
Because
for both.
when we say European fashion, or we talked about like Italian, whatever, we don't think, oh, that's only for Italians, or only certain
Yes.
kind of people can wear that, or, whatever. The country label just speaks to more of like the technique or the quality or whatever. I agree with you there that we need to get to that point where those labels aren't limiting, but more of like
Hmm.
celebrating and speaking
Yeah,
to
and
like the
acknowledgement.
quality and acknowledging the quality of the work. Well, I just have a few like little fun questions that I like to ask, and I've been asking everyone this season, and interested to hear what your answer is going to be. So, if you are invited to attend an exclusive event, there's going to be a red carpet that you have to walk. What African designer are you wearing? That's not you, of course.
Yeah, so I would definitely say Makio.
Okay.
Makio is a Nigerian designer and she goes deep with her inspiration. I think one of her collections was like based on, the market, going to the market, and she had like silver sequins to like speak to the fish scale. So she interprets after the African experience, African design in just like this lovely, very elevated way. So Makio would be one. And I think the other lady, oh my gosh, this is so bad. Her name is Lisa. Her sister owns a store, in Nigeria that's huge.
I know who you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about.
Lisa
Folawio.
Yes, I was gonna say Ola something, but it's the
Lisa F., your stuff
yeah.
is dope. You know who you are, girl. We love you.
Yes.
So yeah, those are two that I'm a big fan of. Probably honorable mention the Studio 81. I don't know why I can get my names together tonight, but like their tie dyes are delicious. So I put them on there too for honorable mention.
Okay, that's different. So a lot of one, I'm a big Makio fan as well. I just love everything they do because I just love like structured
Mm,
design, and she does a lot of that. So I'm with you on that one. You picked somebody different, or you picked a couple different people, which is great because when I've been asking guests, everyone has been saying, and this is not a bad thing, these just happen to be great designers, but I didn't realize just, I didn't think everyone would say them, but like everyone has been saying like Thebe Magugu
mm,
and Max Sosa, both from South Africa.
yeah, yeah.
So
Beautiful
again, for
designers.
good
Yeah.
reason, but I just didn't realize everyone would say it. And it's like clockwork. Every time I ask the question, one of those come up as the answer. So I was wondering if I was going to get the same thing here, but no, I did not.
Yeah, it's a funny thing with designers. I think I actually have to limit my consumption of other designers
Oh, that
because it's
makes
like some
sense.
people inspire me, but then I don't want to be like, oh, I need to be like that. I need to be like that. So I do curate kind of, it's like, man, I really look up to that person. Or I respect what they're doing, but I don't want to get so much into what other folks are doing. I don't mind my own paper. So it's a balance.
No, that's a good point. I mean, as a creative, you do have to limit your intake sometimes because, like, you're also creating the same thing. And so you don't want to be
Mm-hmm.
like another copy or to
Yeah.
be comparing yourself. But, you also are inspired by your peers. So I definitely understand the balance. So, looking at your journey of your brand so far, and your life, this can even go outside of your brand. Like, what has been the most rewarding part for you as a creative person?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. The first would be meeting my customers and learning how Suakoko Betty pieces change their lives or were a part of their lives. A lot of times people will tell me, I wore your jacket for this important presentation. I felt more confident. I felt like authentic, like my natural self. So that's exciting that people would select me for like their big moments or even their everyday moments. So I love that. I mean, being a creative is hard. So certain times, you might say, why am I doing this? Who even cares? And then you do a pop up and someone comes up to you and says that. It's like, okay, I'm helping at least one or two people. Let me keep going. So that definitely is a beautiful part of having the brand. And then another beautiful part is, I mentioned working with the tie-dye artists in Nigeria. So just being able to partner with them to bring them more business. We grew a lot of our wholesale accounts. It was 2023. My years are blurring together. And
Yeah.
I remember bringing them so much business, they had to hire more people. Like my tie-dye lady was like, yeah, I had to bring 5 more people on the team. And I love that in the sense of, okay, we talk about African fashion benefiting local economies. Those 5 people are able to work in a creative field, bring income into their households because of what we're doing with the brand. So I love that. Anytime that we can order from them, we can produce in Nigeria. It's like, yes, somebody is benefiting from this business who is actually African because we're celebrating African design. So I love that.
And then now that you've looked back and you've highlighted all of the rewarding pieces, what are the things that you are looking forward to?
What I'm looking forward to, that's a good question. So I think I definitely want to get more back into the creative part of it. I think when you run a business, you can't spend as much time being creative. You're like, what about my marketing funnels? What about my next campaign? So I think I'm looking forward to getting to the place where I have enough help where I can kind of pull away from some of those more technical parts of the business and really focus more on the creative aspects. So I'm looking forward to doing more of that, more trips to home, more sourcing trips, because that's really my happy place as a designer.
Can you give us a sneak peek of anything that's coming? Can we expect a new collection dropping? Anything you can share?
I got one word for you, expansion. Just we're expanding. I think I touched on it earlier in our conversation. So we're going to be expanding, and that's really all I can say. Expect some different things from us that you haven't seen before. So yeah,
Okay, well, we will stay tuned. Well, thank you so much, Charlene. It was great talking to you. Please share where the people can find you. Of course, swakokobetty.com, but name all of the places that everyone can follow you and be tuned into your expansion.
of course. So Taniqua, thanks for having me on Black Fashion History. It was an amazing conversation. I'm glad we could chat. Everyone, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and of course, join our email list. That's where all the juicy updates are.
Yes,
So
join the email list.
head over to swakokobetty.com to do that. And also follow me personally. I don't talk too much fashion on my Instagram, but personally, I'm over at I am Charlene Dunbar. So that's where I am on Instagram.
All right. Well, thank you again, Charlene. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Taniqua. Thank you, everyone.
And that's it, guys. Make sure you check the show notes for a direct link to all of the resources that I use for today's episode. If you love today's episode or any episode, make sure to give us a 5-star review on Apple. It takes you all of 2 seconds, but it really, really counts towards helping this show reach more people and more Black fashion enthusiasts like you. And if you haven't done so already, follow us on all social media at Black Fashion History Podcast so you can keep up with all things Black fashion history. And the most important thing, if you do nothing else, come back next week and join me for another riveting installment of Black fashion history.